I really should have loved this movie. But why? Well, let me start by introducing you to Mabel. She's a 19-year-old university student, an animal lover who cares way too much, whose love for animals and proclivity to caring has led her into being an environmental activist, being actively crushed down by society, and an animated character. And this is me. I am a 19-year-old college student, an animal lover who cares way too much, whose love for animals and proclivity to caring has led me into being an environmental activist who comes pre-crushed. And I'm also animated. Kind of. So, I really should have loved this movie, and instead, it just made me really, really, really sad. So, as more videos come out about this movie, I think you're going to see that the character designs and the overall look of the film are going to be a big topic of discussion. That's not just because of this movie looking super crazy, but really it's more about how Pixar's visual style has been such a big topic of discussion in animation circles for like the last 6 years. I don't think we can accurately discuss this film or any movie's visual style without talking about everything going on in the industry right now. Studios like Sony Pictures and DreamWorks have been making these massive overhauls of their visual styles to lean on this 2D look. And in light of that, Pixar has been catching a lot of flack for stagnating the look of their movies. And I know that it's upsetting to a lot of people because Pixar is the proverbial granddaddy of 3D animation. And this feeling is only worsened when you compare their past movies to their more recent ones. But when you sit down and really look at the catalog of Pixar movies, while there are visual similarities in a lot of the recent Pixar films, I think that that's a result of the types of stories that Pixar is choosing to tell recently. Let's look at some of the early Pixar movies and their protagonists. A toy, a robot, a bug, a monster, a superhero family, an old man, a fish, a car. If you'll allow me to wipe Elemental and Inside Out from your mind, let's look at some of the more recent films. A little girl, a little boy, two little merboys. And those are all very weirdly human, right? When you look at Pixar's old movies, there's so much variety, and when you look at their releases from the last couple years, I mean, even Soul, while having a very distinct style, was about people. So, while the recent Pixar movies do have differences in style, the content is completely different from what it used to be. And the new similarities in this content, this push of coming-of-age, child, human content, even if you want to argue with me about Luca, plus a branding approach, I think that's what really affected the visual look of all the recent Pixar movies. While this may be disappointing, I do think it's still kind of disingenuous to say that they haven't made any improvements in the last several years. Like I said a second ago, I think what a lot of people are overlooking nowadays is that visual style is very much a part of a studio's branding. And when you look at all of the studios, I think you'll find that Disney is definitely the most guilty out of this. For example, one major complaint they've been getting on all of the Walt Disney Animation Studios movies, specifically the ones about 3D princesses, is the repetition of the visual style. Think Moana, Elsa, Rapunzel. Every single movie they've released has had this look to it. And when they tried to move away from that, like in Brave, it did not go very well for them. But I think what people don't realize is that the other studios are like this too. It's just that their main goal isn't creating such a strict grasp on their own brand. For example, DreamWorks' whole thing is kind of making a different looking movie every time. That's the novelty of it. And Sony was also caught in this style trap until very recently. Now, obviously, when Sony released Spider-Verse, it changed everything.
Sony's intention with that film was to recreate a comic book style within the constraints of 3D technology. To do that, they had to invest a lot of time and money into creating new software and technology that could help break those 3D constraints. And when that worked out so well for them, they made it very clear to other studios that there's room to grow within 3D films. And Pixar and Disney, who used to be the studio that every animation student dreamed of working at, kind of got pushed aside. Now Sony's the big bad boy in town. But when you invest so much time and money into these specific visual elements, it doesn't make a lot of sense to keep investing further when you've already made so much money off of this one visual style. Now, while movies like K-pop Demon Hunters, which Sony even didn't trust to do well, I mean, they made a direct-to-Netflix release, have deviated from this style, and it may be too early to call this because Sony's catalog of films in the style is so short. I think with the release of GOAT, we're seeing a pattern develop where they're utilizing the software in a way that is just because they needed to use it. I mean, don't get me wrong, GOAT is a beautiful movie and I loved it very much, but it doesn't quite make as much sense to have GOAT have the same comic book painterly look as it did in Spider-Verse. I think they could have done some theming or some style for the film that made more sense, but while GOAT is a very objectively pretty movie, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it looking the way it looks, when you look at these other two movies, such as Spider-Verse or K-pop Demon Hunters, who have made these incredibly intentional decisions to theme the visual styles of their film around a certain topic, whether that be anime or comics, like we said, it does just seem a little bit weird that GOAT is just lacking that and just kind of looks like, a Sony movie. But, I mean, there's a good explanation for that. They spent this much money and this much time into this technology, and that is without even mentioning all of the biz dev artists they brought on who work in this style. It's a part of Sony's branding.
And I do want to say, even with this shift of the content within the stories that Pixar is telling, it's not like they've completely stopped innovating. It's just that they're, one, beholden to Daddy Disney's limitations, and two, I don't know that it's in their brand to do these different styles, especially not when every other company is jumping on this trend. I think Wish was a clear example of Disney trying to cash in on this new trending visual style while still adhering to their brand policies, which is totally possible, but Wish obviously did not strike the landing on that. And that's because Disney wasn't willing to commit or go anywhere outside their comfort zone. Hoppers, though, is different, because Hoppers found a nice middle ground of still feeling like and looking like a 2020s Pixar movie, while also having a unique and distinct style. While Mabel's design is clearly the one that has been dialed up the most to be the craziest and funkiest, which I actually think works incredibly well for her character to kind of like separate her from the rest of the cast, because she is like an outlier. That's made very clear within the movie. She's very passionate and aggressive and kind of weird. I will say that a lot of the other characters in this film, especially the side cast or the background characters, are still incredibly reminiscent of Pixar's usual style, bean mouths and all. But I think that works okay here because, like I said, it's a part of their branding, and even if it's not necessarily my cup of tea, it is how Pixar looks. While I think the animal designs fall a bit more flat into this kind of like non-distinct animated movie character style, shout out Open Season. I really, really do love what they did with the animal designs and how they switch their eyes to be more beady and animal-like when the humans are looking at them. I have some issues with the having them be fully animated when Mabel's looking at them, which are much more political, but from a design standpoint, I think it's a very cool and easy little trick to make the movie more visually interesting. This difference in style, though, is not only limited to the characters. They really hit the mark with the environments, both in terms of accuracy and design. The environments are incredibly aesthetically pleasing with this soft, lush, long grass, and also they have this sort of felted look on some of the trees that's very cartoony and matches the texturing on the characters. And while this film doesn't have a real location, I don't think, I would probably place it somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, and I think they put a lot of effort into making it look like that. There's accuracies in the trees and the landscape, and my favorite, the little rock that they sit on throughout the film has some lichen on it. Link in the description to learn more about lichen. I love lichen. There's also a lot of subtlety in the animation of this film that I haven't seen from Pixar recently, or a lot of 3D animated films. The characterization of Mabel and the people around her is really, really exemplified by the animation. I think we see this most in the flashback sequences, where there's so much careful attention to the way she moves and acts, like holding onto her foot when she's nervous or when her face moves, that feels like a real child. It's very, very human, which is nice to see in this age. There's also a lot of, like, jokes in the background of the animation. There's this repeat joke of the little salamander gecko thing, like, looping the exact same wave animation every time he's on screen. Every time he's on screen, and while it's not commented on, it is pretty silly. I'll rapid fire through a couple more points. The soundtrack is awesome, both the original composition and the songs that they chose. It's a mix of, like, modern music and 80s soft rock, and it's just perfect fit. And the jokes in this movie are great. They're really good. Pretty much everyone laughed at every single joke in the theater. There's one joke that you've seen from the trailers where they're all screaming, which the adults did not find quite as funny, but the kids, oh man, the kids loved that. And the last point is that this movie is like legitimately scary and is definitely going to traumatize a lot of children. If you have very young kids, I would maybe suggest not showing them this film. Slight spoiler, I won't say who, but there is a sequence in the movie in which one of the characters rips their face off, like a human character like physically pulls the skin off of their face. So that might be an issue. I don't know what your kids are seeing on the internet, but maybe keep that in mind. You're going to be surprised to find that this section is pretty short. One thing that stuck out to me as a little weird was the choice to have Mabel be a college student. This movie is clearly targeted towards a very young age demographic. So, to have Mabel go on an emotional journey that makes sense to the kids watching, they had to make her very immature. Not that 19-year-olds can't be immature or emotionally stunted, but it makes her actions throughout the film seem irrational. Most scenes, she's acting like a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old. Which, while yes, she does have signs of some kind of neurodivergence, me too, girl, and a complicated relationship with her mother, there's not much else to explain why. In fact, throughout the film, we get these flashbacks, which, like I said, are very jarring and bad, in my opinion, to when Mabel was a little girl with her grandmother. They serve to show why the Glade is so important to her and how she learned to curb her anger issues through the guidance of her grandmother. How she grew through the guidance of her grandmother. But in the movie, there's no growth from herself in elementary school in the flashbacks to how she acts as an adult in college. I understand more than most people that caring and rage is not necessarily something that you just grow out of, but it just felt a little off, like it was serving something else in the story. So, I started volunteering in high school. Not specifically anything eco-y, just your usual volunteer organizations. Not because of any deep instilled sense to serve, but because of an hour requirement from the National Honor Society. However, I, like Mabel, always loved animals, always loved nature, and always cared. So, on one of these scheduled volunteering events, a tree planting, I met a very eccentric old woman. The one organizing the tree planting, who clearly, just like me, cared way too much. Who was way too much. Coming straight out of being homeschooled for most of my life, and being thrown straight into a middle school, and then high school, where being too much of anything is a problem, I was struggling a lot with being myself, or knowing what myself was. And meeting this woman, who, by all accounts, could not care less about what other people thought, well, I was drawn to her. So, when she offered me to start working with her on her nature preserve, of course, I said yes. I worked with her until the end of high school, even over the summer after. We scheduled events, spent hours out in the forest in the dead of winter, cutting down invasive plants. Just me, a woman in her late 70s, and a chainsaw. One thing about this lady, she loves prairies. Where we live, a lot of the natural prairies have been decimated. She loves them so much that she turned her property into a prairie. And here's one thing about my hometown. There's really not safe ways for kids to go to or from school, and there's an expectation for a lot of kids to walk to school. So, along one of these trails that the kids have to take along the side of a big cornfield to get to their elementary school, there was this big area of what was once a wetland prairie. But the emphasis there is on was. A wetland prairie without prairie plants is a big pit of mud. But this lady, she loves prairies, so we're gonna fix it. So we get thousands of dollars worth of prairie seeds and organize with that very same group of kids I met her through to seed the seep. so that kids can walk by wonderful native flowers and not an empty field decimated by agriculture. Now, wildflower seeds take a long time to grow, especially prairie seeds. Years. It'd be a while before we got to see the prairie, but that'd be worth it for the future of the kids who have to spend every day, every morning, every night walking alongside that trail. Progress is progress, no matter how long it takes. It's been 3 years since then. I've since gone off to college, and the flowers should be sprouting by now. So, when I go back to visit my hometown, I drive by the seep. And there's a bulldozer, and a construction sign, and the one pathway that these kids have to walk on, outside of walking down the side of a country road, the hours of labor, the thousands of dollars, completely wiped out by a housing development. But people gotta live somewhere, right? Remember how, in the beginning of this video, I compared myself to Mabel? I did that for a reason. Because, while I went out of the way to stress how it's okay not to be the target audience of the movie, and I am certainly not the target audience of Hoppers, I am someone who should, and does, relate heavily to what she's going through in the movie. The key points of her emotional journey should resonate more with me than anyone else, and they don't. They fall so incredibly flat that when I was watching them, I just felt weird. And I'm a crier at movies. I'll cry at pretty much anything. So why didn't this get me? Well, I think it's for 3 main reasons. The writing for Mabel's character arc and the overall film are super underdeveloped and rushed. They tried to squeeze this incredibly vast, complex topic into a fun kids movie. Which, let's be clear, is not impossible. And in fact, it's been done before by Pixar. The second issue is that this movie asks you to so clearly overlook fundamental power imbalances involved in not only ecopolitics, but in the dynamic of nature as a whole. Pond rules, as you may have seen in the trailer for Hoppers, is tied into the core theme of the film. King George is a vessel for the theme. He's positioned as being in the right. But the problem with his message, that the human environment and the animal environment are all just one big place and we're all living together in harmony, is that it completely overlooks the power imbalances between the animals getting their habitat stolen and destroyed and the humans expanding into that said habitat. The solution of live to learn in peace is not sustainable in any way, because as humans multiply, they will naturally take more and more. I don't need to tell you that a white upper middle class mare and a beaver aren't on the same playing field. But I might need to tell you that a 19-year-old woman of color and a white upper middle class mare aren't on the same playing field, because the movie sure won't. The entire core of Mabel's character arc is learning to deal with her feelings of helplessness and owning up to the fact that her methodology for trying to deal with things isn't working, that her anger isn't helpful, and that she is just the same, just as culpable as the mayor. This story only works in a situation where someone like Mabel has the same level of power as someone like Jerry, which, even ignoring gender, age, and race, is objectively not true, even within the constraints of the world they made for this story. He is literally the mayor, and she is shown in the film to be a 19-year-old estranged from her parents who has been shunned by the people in her town for being too weird or too compassionate. Because this film was made by a mega corporation, it cannot properly engage with its own themes. There is no world in which Disney would greenlight a film that accurately speaks on eco-political issues in any semblance of an accurate manner. Not just because that topic is too big to digest in a kids' movie, but because of who they are. So when you hear this rhetoric being shared, that everyone is good deep down, and that it is on the activists to meet the oppressors at their level, well, that just shows that it is not possible for Disney to write a movie about this topic that holds the correct party accountable. Okay, but why does this matter? Remember when I told you that story earlier? Stories are the most powerful way to get messages across. Humans connect with stories. Concepts and themes that are too difficult to engage with when observed in reality are much more digestible when told through a story. It's part of the reason why I love animation so much. It changes people. It changes the way they perceive and interact with issues, especially when watched at a young age. It provides the scaffolding for people to make their own moral decisions, even if they don't realize it. The target demographic for animated films is kids. When we put this kind of content in front of children, especially children who are day by day losing access to nature, to the environment, kids who will grow into adults who have never seen a bug, it's going to affect the way they see the world. It's going to affect the decisions they make. And, okay, maybe I'm being dramatic about the extent of this, but as someone who's worked with children and the environment, who spent countless hours in an uphill climb trying to pass legislation or physically clear out areas with hundreds of pounds of invasive species, I've seen the effect of things like this. To me, it's not a tangible what if, even if all of my lived experience is anecdotal. There are people who are trying. There are people who are fighting. But I've seen how pointless that can be. The truth is, it doesn't matter how much honeysuckle you cut, how many signatures you get, how many trees you plant, if someone's just going to bulldoze them over. And if no one's going to care if they do. Caring is a lot more than having an opinion. It's showing up and doing something. And if you're looking for a nice, tied-up conclusion to this video to make you feel better, to satisfy you before you go on to your next video essay, I'm sorry, but you're not gonna get it here. I've done my best, and it's not enough. I can't turn a congressman into a beaver to make him get my point. And believe me, I've tried. So, stories are the best way to get a message across, and this is the message we're giving to our next generation. They're already being made not to care. I'll add a note here on the end, because I do realize that could be pretty heartbreaking. Certainly I felt that before. I am going to link some different organizations that are trying to make a change in the description. The truth is, change happens at a local level, and the best way for you to figure out how you can help is by researching things around you, in your town, in your city. That's all I have to say. Bye.